I think right now, our biggest obstacle to addressing the climate crisis is our divides. We have all the solutions. We could be changing it. We could be on a trajectory towards a world that's, holistic and fair. But we are so divided that we can't agree on how we're going to move forward. There is no way you can plant a seed in the barren soil of division.
Hello, and welcome to the Inner Green Deal podcast, where we talk to inspiring guests about the human dimension of sustainability and explore the link between our personal journeys and the positive impacts we can have on the world. My name is Tamsin Walker. In this month's episode, we're going to be exploring a different way of considering economics and the language used around the climate crisis to tell us the stories we do and don't need to hear. And to talk about all of this, I'm joined by Inez Aponte. Inez is an educator, storyteller, and consultant in Barefoot Economics. With a background in performance, storytelling, and improvisation, she focuses on the interplay between language, narrative, and behaviour change, working with groups to cultivate what she calls a radical collective imagination as the basis for addressing our shared complex challenges. In 2021, she founded a social enterprise called Crazy Beautiful World with her then 16-year-old son. Their mission is to connect young people with the adults who care about their future, to explore compassionate and wise ways to navigate the challenges of the 21st century. Welcome, Inez, to the Inner Green Deal podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I am genuinely looking forward to this conversation and to talking to you about language and stories and bare feet. But I'd like to get the ball rolling with a question that I ask everybody, which is about connection and nature, and whether there is a place that was particularly important for you in terms of nature while you were growing up.
Oh, that's a really interesting question, because I was born in New York City. So the first 9 years of my life, I was surrounded by cars and buildings. But in my mind, every time I do a drawing, it was of a little sort of peaceful landscape with a little house and animals around it. And that might have come because my parents are from Puerto Rico and Suriname, from rural communities. They were immigrants into the States. So I had this imaginary nature projection that I was doing. And then we moved to Holland, and there I was surrounded by nature. And I just remember sitting and climbing in trees, and it just being part of the sort of everyday. And now, funny enough, I live in Devon, and I almost live in that picture that I used to draw when we were in New York. So, yeah.
That's really testament to the inner connection with the natural world. If you're not actually even living in it, yet that's what comes out of your imagination when you're drawing a picture of home.
Yeah.
So I want to look at this idea of barefoot economics. I've heard you talking about barefoot economics, requiring us to step into the mud, which I think is such a nice turn of phrase. But I wonder if you can give an introduction to exactly what barefoot economics are.
Yes, barefoot economics is also known as human scale development. And it was created in the 90s by academics. But the person who's mostly known for creating it is called Manfred Max Neef. He was a Chilean economist. He had been working as a development economist in some of the poorest parts of the world. And he was in Peru, up in the mountains, working with a community. And one day he went out and the ground had turned to mud. And he found himself standing opposite a young man. And he knew this young man didn't have a job, but he had a wife and 4 children and a mother-in-law to feed. And he was standing with his bare feet in the mud. And at that moment, Manfred Max Neef realized that everything he knew about economics could not really adequately describe the condition that this man was facing. Should he be glad that imports were up or the GDP was rising? So he needed to find another way to describe economics as if people and planet really matter. And so they came up with these 9 fundamental needs. And it focuses away from GDP towards the meeting of fundamental human needs, but also distinguishes between needs and satisfiers. So education is a satisfier for understanding. However, there's any number of ways to be educated. And there's any number of ways you can look at whether this education system you have is really meeting needs. So the framework is designed for people in communities to ask questions about how their needs are met and to help them understand that their need satisfaction is the purpose of the economy, not GDP growth. So in Barefoot Economics, wealth and poverty are very different things from conventional economics. So you might be on, 500,000 a year, but maybe you don't have much affection in your life. And that would actually just be bad economics because your need for affection is a fundamental human need. You cannot survive and thrive without that. And what I think you start to see when you do an analysis of different cultures around the world is that sometimes cultures that we call poor are wealthy in other things. They may have a wealth of affection or a wealth of participation or a wealth of identity. So it's about a complete reframing of what matters in the economy.
You mentioned their satisfiers, and I've also listened to you talking about pseudo-satisfiers, and I'm really interested in this idea of pseudo-satisfiers, and it's another great expression. I'd like to hear a little bit more about them. What are they, and how can we be alert to them and make strides towards breaking free from them?
Basically, what a pseudo-satisfier is an attempt to meet a need that is not actually designed to meet that need, so will continue to fail, and you will feel pseudo-satisfied. So an example of that would be if you're trying to meet a need for identity by shopping, which is not to say that you might not sometimes have to buy something which does have a genuine relationship with your identity, but most of what we see in fashion is shopping to keep up with trends that have very little to do with who we really are deep down. A lot of consumption is directed towards a need that is not the need we think it's for. So if you're buying a new car when your car is perfectly fine because you saw an ad on television and it looks so glamorous, and I always love car ads because they're always on roads where there's no other cars. It's like, that is not real life. But anyway, so you get caught up with that. And then you buy this car and you're trying to become a person that is the person with that kind of car. But I have yet to meet the person who feels that that is really a satisfying sense of identity. So it will do something for a while, and you will continue having to get the next thing. So a pseudo-satisfier is not designed to really meet your need. And basically the capitalist economy, in order to grow, must keep pumping out pseudo-satisfiers. Because if we were satisfied, we would stop shopping and the economy would effectively collapse. So we're kind of on this treadmill, locked into this system, but it's not satisfying us. So when you take the conversation away from GDP growth and you start talking to people, very quickly, if you're in a safe space, people know all of this. And so that's where some of the liberation comes, is just, okay, now I can see what's actually going on. That's not the same as being able to change it, but it's the start.
But so how do you, let's say me or just any person who is not necessarily thinking in these terms, are there kind of little red flags that could be looked out for within oneself?
When I found out about climate change 17, nearly 18 years ago, my son was only a year old, and I was like, oh my God. And I did everything I could to try and make people aware of what was going on. And I just realized that actually people find it very hard to talk about those challenging things, but they find it quite easy to talk about their needs. So I think if people tap into what they do in their daily lives, with the attempts they're making to meet those needs, let's say you go through those needs and thinking, okay, how satisfying is this? Is this really working for me? Then from there, it's a question of like, why isn't it working? And the danger that we have in this culture, which is how we've been indoctrinated, is to think, oh, it's something that I've done. If you look on a systemic level, a lot of people are feeling the same way. If you see a pattern of behavior, of pain, of dysfunction happening, it can't just be all these individuals somehow, there's something wrong with them. You have to look at what's happening in the culture. And again, there's another word for that in human scale development and Barefoot Economics. It's called collective pathologies. So if you have a poverty in a culture that's been going on for long enough, we'll take the example of loneliness, of a poverty of affection where people become more and more separate, then if you get a collective pathology, and it's very hard to see those, it just becomes the culture. I don't need other people. I do things on my own. It's all from myself. I'm a self-made man or woman. Is that how we want to be living? And I've had grown men crying in my workshop saying, I need more contact with other people. And that is alive in the culture, but we need to find spaces in which we can express that and then start to look, okay, how is this working systemically? Quite often things are happening because they're happening to everybody.
So what I wanted to ask further about Barefoot Economics is how it plays out in the context of making a contribution to countering the climate crisis.
To go back to why I stopped talking about climate change was because I realized that the economic system, unless we fix those perverse incentives of trying to keep growing GDP, we cannot fix climate change. It's just not possible, because people say, oh, we can't afford these environmental measures. I mean, that is just insane. There is no need you can meet on a dying planet. You have to have at the base of your needs model, of your economic model, a thriving earth. So what I was then doing was guiding people who said, oh, I don't care about the environment, or I don't care about economics, from a needs perspective into, okay, you want to have these things in your life, you need the earth to be thriving. So that was the kind of journey I was making with people. And what I'm noticing now, and this is to do with how narratives get hijacked, is that the environmental movement, in terms of how it's communicated to the masses, I think it's not made that link between the economy, people's needs, and the earth. So therefore, what people start to hear, because the big economic narrative which the media is holding for us, which is that we can't do anything without GDP growth, that keeps telling them that, oh, these environmentalists want you to have a lesser quality of life. You've got to give things up. And it's like, if a person can't even feed their children, is struggling to pay the bills, is anxious about job security, so basically their needs aren't properly met, there is no space to go beyond that and to think about, oh, the earth or other species or even other human beings. And because we don't live in an ecological society where I viscerally know that my health depends on the health of the river, if you start saying to me, oh, but you know what, there's this big thing, and I will listen to the guy who says, yeah, don't worry about that. We're going to make sure you have jobs. Because now I am actually indigenous to that economic system. I'm no longer indigenous to the earth. So it doesn't matter how true what you're saying is. If you can't tell a story that makes sense to the people you need to get on board, you're just, shouting in the wind. So why don't we listen to what people's real needs are, start there, and then take them on a journey? Okay, you are struggling, you're worried about your job. How about thinking about opportunities for you to create your own job, to have a local economy, to meet your needs locally? And that's kind of a win-win situation. Let's say you could be trained to start as a kind of local mechanic or a baker or whatever it is, and you could do that locally. You could start something for yourself. You could be a local entrepreneur. Then you're feeding into the local economy. Other people are doing the same. You get your needs met. But it's understanding that, because right now what we keep getting the story the wrong way around. So we have this thing where we call them the job creators. These are the people with all the money and they're creating the jobs, right? But the fact is that we are the economy. It is with our efforts that things get done. And in fact, what they're doing, they're kind of extracting wealth out of our local economy. Because all the things they say they could do for us, we could probably do for ourselves if we had the, investment.
I wanted to move on to storytelling, but maybe just one other question before we get there. Do you have a concrete example to share of where you have seen how and where the approaching the climate crisis through Barefoot Economics, how it's had a positive impact?
I don't know if I could say that it's purely Barefoot Economics, but one of the things that I was involved with for a long time was the transition movement. And I feel the transition movement comes closest to actually offering a holistic approach to the climate crisis in the sense that it's bottom up, it's looking at communities, it's looking at creating livelihoods for people, it's looking at energy, it's looking at education, it's looking at the inner life as well. So I think that kind of holistic approach is about meeting all those needs. The transition movement actually started from a desire to look at peak oil, so energy use rather than the climate crisis, that all these things are interlinked. So yeah, I'd say that would be a good example. Yeah, and any kind of community-led movements tend to put humans at the center of that in relation to the earth.
You have a background in storytelling, and you mentioned storytelling just then as well. And you mentioned the media and the stories that we are being told. And increasingly, we're also being made aware of the fact that people have kind of news fatigue, or there's the avoidance mentality towards news. And so I wonder what you make of the fact that often, stories that make it into the news around the climate crisis, they highlight what is going wrong rather than what is going right. And your interpretation of the impact of that imbalance.
I don't think we're going to make much headway with a doom scenario. I have stopped reading how bad things are because it's not getting better. I know that. There's a lot to be done. I'm getting on with it. I think the lot that needs to be done is also that we have to find joy in everything that we do. Those of us who are not being bombed out of our houses, under starvation, those of us who still have water running out the taps, we are in an incredibly privileged position. So we could be using that to enjoy and to spread joy and to be together and to help people move out of that very anxious state that people are in. So, given that we kind of know that things are bad, in what way can we start making things good with what we have? And one of the things I think I've noticed is that around activism, around the urgency of what's going on, there tends to be an idea that the only people who are doing the right thing are the people who are on the barricades, people who are fighting, and because we need to fight. Now, 17 years later, I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted with the whole climate crisis thing. Not that it isn't real, it's true, it's happening. But I started to look at, if we are really going to get the critical mass that we need to have an opportunity for different types of people to engage with this. And we need a culture change. We do need to have our voices heard. We do need to get on the barricades. We need to use any kind of means to change the legal structures that are now supporting the economy that we have. But we also need to grow connection between each other. We need to find ways to meet our needs in a way that doesn't do harm. So some of that work is very different from being on the barricades. It's about creating structures. It's about growing food. It's about finding alternative energy sources. It's about creating community. The third node in that triad, as I call it, is healing. We need to actually heal from the damage that's been done. We need to heal from colonialism, from extractivism, from divides between us that are now rampant. So if you are doing some of that healing work, then you are also part of this culture change that needs to happen. So do you have enough people in each of those corners? Because the three of them actually work together. And that also means that you can get people on board who may not be thinking, oh, I'm actively worried about the climate crisis. There can be any number of ways that people could put their energies towards something that doesn't mean that they have to buy in wholesale to an ideology. And I think what's happened with the narrative around environmentalism is that it's become a kind of ideology. And then people say, oh, I don't believe the ideology, when actually, no, it's simply a fact. It's like, if we want to live here, we've got to take care of the planet. And that is nothing to do with ideology. And that means sometimes you have to drop your particular brand, like, for example, degrowth. I'm completely for degrowth, but the word degrowth is so controversial. Just don't call it anything, just do the work. If you're on the ground with people, have a conversation with them that starts with what they need first. I think right now our biggest obstacle to addressing the climate crisis is our divides. We have all the solutions. We could be changing it. We could be on a trajectory towards a world that's holistic and fair, but we are so divided that we can't agree on how we're going to move forward. There is no way you can plant a seed in the barren soil of division.
Wow, there's a lot to think about there. Narratives, but also language within the narratives. And you referenced barricades and, in inverted commas, fighting. And I mean, these are terms that come up over and again: the fight, the battle, the saving the planet. There is a battle cry to it. And I think these words have been adopted into the climate vernacular. And I really question how useful they are. Yes, okay, in many respects, it can be termed as a fight. There is a lot of work to do. There's a huge ball to push up an incredibly high mountain. But I really do question the language that is used. And I'm not saying that I've never used it myself, but as someone who is involved in narrative and clearly pays attention to language, what kind of language should we be using in order to achieve maximum reach or to reach a point of maximum action?
One of the things I think that is happening with language in a capitalist economy is that every time you utter a word that seems to connect with people, capitalism will come in there and use it to sell people stuff. I mean, it's just remarkable. It's like being in a sort of sticky web. Every time you turn, you get sort of more stuck in it. I think it's more than the words, though. So what if, instead of thinking, oh, we're going to go out there with this message, we go out there and we just become very, very good listeners. I think there's such a need for genuine connection that is not about trying to take something from you, because we live in a world where we're constantly advertised to, and we know that those things that are offered are conditional. So what if we created a kind of movement of generosity, where we were coming together with people to be joyous, to celebrate, and then, hey, you know what? By the way, in order for us to do this for you, we need to have a world that's functioning. How about helping us to create this world? I think that we mistakenly believe that people are indifferent to the climate crisis, or they're indifferent to other people's suffering. And I really don't believe that. I believe that we're living in a system that doesn't make it easy to care. It doesn't give us a lot of space to care or opportunity to care. And that's where the liberation comes from. We need to liberate people from these economic structures that force them to work 40, 50, 60 hours a week and still don't have a roof over their heads. If we were doing that, then we will see that, people generally do want to do the right thing. So why don't we become better equipped at having difficult conversations with people and connecting across divides? We want to connect with the earth. We need to learn how to connect with each other first.
Well, I suppose that kind of feeds into this. So you set up a few years ago a social enterprise with your son, your then teenage son, called Crazy Beautiful World. I've read a little bit about it, but I would love to hear a bit about it from you.
That started when my son was 14, and he came to me and he said, "Mum, I hate adults. They have ruined the world." What he was seeing was, what you kind of get from the media, which is people gaslighting us around what's happening, politicians lying. And he was just like, I don't want to be like that. And so I just think, what's happening to our young people if they look at the world? What are we doing if we can't present them with an image of adults that is something to aspire to? Then we've failed as a culture. I just thought this is a cultural failure. I thought we need to start creating connections between the generations. So we started running these workshops, which we called Crazy Beautiful Conversations. And we ran them with teenagers and older people. And we started having conversations about the things that are difficult to talk about. So it's a process that I designed to get us what I call conversation ready. And it's about understanding your nervous system, understanding how sometimes it's not the right time for a conversation. So that whole process is what I then do with adults and young people. But it's actually something you can do to bridge any kind of divide. So at the moment, we're looking at bringing that to other groups who need to connect, and to be bringing also sort of sense making into that. And the kind of theory of change for Crazy Beautiful World is that in order for change to happen, you need to connect, you need to have that safe space. And then from there, you can start making sense of the world. So how do you bring a sort of systems analysis to the problems we have? And then from there, you try and tell the stories that align with the values that you've discovered. And then there's a sort of cycle. If we start telling better stories that really align with what we want the world to look like, that feeds into the ground of connection. And then, you have a sort of cycle of hopefully slowly changing the culture. So that's what it's all about.
It does sound genuinely beautiful. I love the idea of crazy beautiful conversation. Actually, I had to kind of laugh inwardly when you were talking about your son saying adults. My daughter, she once bought a T-shirt from a charity shop, and it's just said, "Don't grow up. It's a trap." And she was about 14 when she bought it, and she wore it for years.
I think at the age of 14, when children become teenagers, they look out in the world and they still have this incredibly tender vision of a world that is fair. And then we knock it out of them. I would say, grow up. And in our culture, growing up means caring less, becoming less aligned to your values. I mean, I don't want to live like that. So when he said that to me, it also tapped into the bit of me that recognized that. And when I talk to adults, what people love about the connection between the teens and the adults is that they all go, oh my God, I was like that. I had this vision for the world. I had this dream of how we would be. So I feel that, we talk about adulting, but I think we need to be teening. We need to be tapping in to what it was that we believed was possible. And that energy, when I work with people, actually it's exuberant. It really believes that something can happen.
Which takes me right back to the very first question about your picture when you were 9 years old, what you were imagining, even though you weren't experiencing it. Inner.
Yes.
I've got just one last question for you, and that is the same question that everyone gets asked. And it is, if you could ensure that everybody in the world had a single skill, what would you choose it to be?
I would say that everyone gets an opportunity to be an artist of some shape or form, whether that's music or theatre or drawing, the creative skills, imagination would be the one thing.
Thank you so much.
Oh, it's been a great conversation.
I hope you enjoyed listening to my conversation with Inez. And if you'd like to know more about her work, there are links in the show notes. I'll be back next month with a new episode of the Inner Green Deal podcast, but you don't have to wait that long if you'd like to listen to other interesting conversations with people working on sustainability and the establishment of deeper connections to ourselves, to others, and to the world around us. There's plenty to go at in the archives. And as always, feel free to subscribe or share. Thank you for listening. I look forward to you joining me again the next time. For now, though, bye-bye.